A gun in a forest is visible. You know where the threat is. You know who is carrying it and you know how to fight it. But what happens when the battlefield shifts from the forest to your phone screen? And when the weapon is no longer a rifle but a narrative? When anger is amplified through the algorithms of social media, genuine grievances are converted into permanent distrust, and the objective is not merely to oppose a government but to convince an entire generation that the system itself cannot be trusted. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in his Independence Day address, used a term that has since triggered a nationwide debate, Dimagi Naxal. And this week, organizer asked a fundamental question: who exactly is a Dimagi Naxal? Most importantly, is this merely a political expression, or does Maoist literature itself reveal a strategy of penetrating intellectual, academic, cultural, and urban spaces? This is the focus of this issue. Namaste, I'm Sonam Singh, and you are watching Organizer This Week. So, the cover reads Algorithm of Anarchy, and our cover package decoding the cognitive virus goes directly into Maoist documents to understand the ideological architecture behind this phenomenon. Our editor Shri Prafulla Ketkar, in the editorial Decoding and Defeating the Dimagi Naxals, begins with Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's warning against what he called the grammar of anarchy. The editorial argues that genuine dissent must be distinguished from attempts to delegitimize democratic institutions themselves. It examines how social media, civil society networks, and identity-based mobilizations can become instruments of cognitive warfare, while making an important distinction: not every protester, agitator, or person demanding reform is a Dimagi Naxal, and which is very important. So that brings us to our detailed cover story. Columnist Karthik Lokhande, in Decoding the Cognitive Virus, does something very important. Instead of merely debating the terminology, he goes into the documents of the Maoists themselves. He examines the CPI Maoist party program, Urban Perspective, our work in urban areas, and strategy and tactics of Indian revolution. And what do these documents discuss? Working among intellectuals, students, writers, teachers, cultural activists, lawyers, middle class employees. They speak about political education, films, literature, debates, magazine, publishing houses, and even pictorial and video material as instruments of ideological propagation. The story says that what we today understand as social media driven radicalization has an ideological predecessor in these Maoist strategies. But the cover package does not end there. Counter-terrorism expert and government consultant Vipul Tamhane, in Identifying Danger with Precision, even says that armed Naxalism may have been substantially dismantled, but the ideological mindset can survive. He examines what he sees as selective sympathy for extremist figures, intellectual cover for left-wing extremism, debates around conversion and uniform civil code, and of course the larger attempt to keep the legitimacy of the nation state permanently under question. His central distinction is between criticism of government, which is essential to democracy, and rejection of the constitutional and territorial finality of the Indian Union. Then comes Colonel Ajay Jindal with Weaponizing Victimhood, the cognitive front of warfare. His warning is very simple. Insurgencies do not necessarily disappear when they lose territory. They mutate. He traces the movement from armed networks in forest to urban networks, and finally towards what he describes as a cognitive domain where genuine social grievances can be amplified through algorithms, digital influencers, propaganda networks, and increasingly through artificial intelligence and deepfakes. His article makes another crucial distinction. Legitimate dissent seeks to reform and strengthen the system, whereas cognitive subversion seeks to destroy trust in the system altogether. From ideological battles, we now move to the Sangh's organizational and social outreach. Kunti Sundar reports from Visakhapatnam on the 3-day Akhil Bharatiya Samanvay Baithak, attended by the representatives of 32 RSS-inspired organizations. The meeting discussed demographic change, drug abuse among youth, flood relief in Assam, Sant Ravidas's 650th birth anniversary, Panch Parivartan, environmental conversation, artificial intelligence, and the aspirations of young Bharat. Around 21,000 young Swayamsevaks participated in this 21-day training camps this year, and more than 60% of those attending daily shakas are young people. The report also takes us inside Vijnana Vihar, where education has expanded into healthcare, tribal education, vocational training and community development, which is an example how education can become an instrument of wider social transformation. Our organizer bureau also reports from Canada, where more than 100 Canadian organizations and civil liberties groups have backed RSS Sarsangchalak Dr. Mohan Bhagwat's proposed visit. Their message to the Canadian government is centered around evidence, due process, equality, pluralism, freedom of expression, and freedom of religion. Their appeal is perhaps best captured in one line: Canada needs more dialogue, not division, more evidence, not allegations, and more due process and not just political pressure. This issue also carries reports from the 80th Independence Day celebrations of the RSS. At Nagpur, Sarsangchalak Dr. Mohan Bhagwat spoke about sacrifice, dutifulness, knowledge, purity and prosperity, while stressing that debate, dialogue and opposition are essential parts of democracy but must also be accompanied by responsibility. In Kolkata, Sarkarewah Dattatreya Hosabale called upon citizens to protect the unity, integrity and security of the nation. And at Keshav Kunj in Delhi, Sarkarewah Dr. Krishna Gopalji remembered the long civilizational struggle that preceded independence and called for a united Bharat capable of inspiring the world. But what does independence mean economically and strategically 80 years later? That questions run through another major section of the edition. Sujit Mishra, Divisional Railway Manager of the Solapur Division, writes, walking the difficult path confidently. From vaccine Maitri and semiconductor manufacturing to railway electrification and artificial intelligence, he reads the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Independence Day address as an argument for moving beyond political independence towards economic, technological and industrial self-reliance. He makes a very important point. Dependence is not simply an economic cost. Dependence can become a lever, and the hand controlling that lever may not be us. Professor Puneet Kumar of Lucknow University takes this discussion further through the Prime Minister's concept of Shakti Ki Saptadhara, 7 streams of national strength, which are manufacturing, agriculture and food production, technology and innovation, Gati Shakti and infrastructure, defense capability, the green and blue economy, and of course, Bharat's soft power. His article, Framework for Sevenfold Development, says that these should not be seen as 7 disconnected government sectors, but as interconnected dimensions of national power, ultimately flowing from one source, the knowledge, character, creativity and confidence of Bharatiya people. Then Satish Kumar, the national co-organizer of the Swadeshi Jagran Manch, turns specifically to energy in energizing self-sufficiency. And he warns that geopolitical conflict has demonstrated how energy itself can be weaponized. With Bharat importing nearly 90% of its crude oil requirement and depending significantly on West Asia, energy security becomes national security. His argument therefore connects Atmanirbharta with renewable energy, nuclear power, green hydrogen, domestic exploration, critical minerals and even biogas, which builds a decentralized and resilient energy ecosystem. And finally, this issue turns from strategy and economics to civilization and culture. Historian Dr. Ankita Kumar in Bond of Fraternity revisits Bengal in 1905 when Lord Curzon partitioned Bengal. Rabindranath Tagore transformed Raksha Bandhan into an instrument of national solidarity. Hindus and Muslims tied Rakhis to each other as a public declaration that a colonial boundary could never sever their shared bonds. The article reminds us that cultural symbols have often been political without being partisan, becoming instruments through which a civilization responds to division. Columnist Dr. Anindya Bandyopadhyay meanwhile examines the relationship between the left, Rabindranath Tagore and Raksha Bandhan. In Red Sickle, Strike on Thread of Fraternity, he contrasts Tagore's 1905 use of Rakhi as a symbol of unity with later communist politics and argues that Marxist interpretations attempted to strip Tagore's nationalism of its spiritual and civilizational foundation. As we close in Keralam, Lakshmi Ranjit, in the special report Reclaiming the Sanatan and the Sacred, asks a deceptively simple question. What exactly is Onam? A secular harvest festival, a cultural celebration, or a deeply rooted Vaishnav tradition centered on King Mahabali, Vaman and Bhagwan Vishnu? Tracing temple traditions, inscriptions and literature references, the report argues that Onam's inclusiveness does not erase its Sanatan roots. Muslims and Christians participate in Pookalam and Sadhya demonstrate the openness of the celebration, but the report says that inclusiveness and historical identity are not contradictory. At its heart, the story of Onam remains one of devotion, surrender, grace, and the homecoming of Mahabali. So, from the forest where the armed Maoism is retreating to the digital spaces where ideological battles may be taking new forms, from the RSS Samanvay Baitak in Vishakhapatnam to the debate over Sarsanghchalak Ji's Canada visit, from Atmanirbharta and Saptadhara to the energy challenge, and from Rabindranath Tagore's Raksha Bandhan to the sacred roots of Onam. This week's organizer asked the larger question: what does it take to secure our civilization? Military strength alone is not enough. Economic strength alone is not enough. Technology strength is not enough. A nation also has to understand that ideas that shape its people, the narrative that influence its youth, the economic dependencies that can constrain its choices, and the civilizational memory that gives its people a sense of who they are. That is all in this edition of Organizer this week. To read these stories in detail, pick up the latest edition of Organizer. I am Sonam Singh. Thank you for watching. Namaskar.